friend and enemies. You know who you are. Let's dive right into the first lecture. Now, the first week of school, we get a lot of things, advisory, schedule changes, etc. And you might not be able to catch this lecture from the first week. So let's do a little catch up, shall we? So, first thing we need to know, we need to talk about humans. This is world history of people. Homo sapiens sapiens. So we know that as much as we can tell, humans are at least, modern humans, Homo sapiens sapiens, are at least 200,000 years old, going back to probably East Africa. We have archaeological evidence that confirms this, genetic evidence that shows that Africa is more genetically diverse, which is something that happens when a species starts in a place and moves to other places. And there is tons of really interesting stuff, some historical and scientific arguments talking about where humans originate and where they move to at what time, and it's really fascinating. You do not need to know that for the AP test, but it's some really cool stuff if you want to look it up. There's plenty of information of it online. But we know something starts happening. People start migrating. 50, 60,000 or so years ago, we see people getting into Eurasia, the Middle East, Central Asia, and then at least 13,000 years ago, we know that there are people in the Americas crossing over the land bridge, probably taking boats as well along the shoreline. There's some controversy here. Some people say that maybe 20,000, 30,000 years ago, people are getting into the Americas, and it's a really fascinating, interesting thing. And if you're interested in that, again, you just look it up. But you just need to know that at least 13, 14,000 years ago, we have humans in the Americas. And then as little as, 1,000, 1,500 years ago, you have people with boats settling the Polynesian islands. And so humans are a very migratory and moving species. And unlike a lot of other species, we don't really change that much in an evolutionary sense when we move to different places. So we're very unique in that sense. And if you really just need to know kind of generally where humans originate, how old they are, and where they move to and how they're able to move there. It's primarily through walking, and then also you have some small boats as well. One really important and interesting thing about humans is how they adapt to their environment. Now, you might have heard the term Stone Age before. You might not have ever really thought about why it's called a Stone Age. It's called a Stone Age because people use stone tools. Now, that's not the only thing people use. You use bones and hides as well. One of the really important bone tools will be a bone needle, making needles out of sharp bones in order to stitch together hide from animal skins. But there are no metals, hence Stone Age. You might know just offhand there's something like the Iron Age and the Bronze Age and all that. Well, right now it's just stone. You also might hear the term lithic, like Neolithic period or Paleolithic. When you hear lithic or lithos, you're thinking about stone in world history. And we adapt to our environment primarily with fire. And there are multiple uses of fire. We use it for heat. We use it for cooking. There's even a lot of research into the fact that cooking meat, which probably was happening before modern Homo sapiens sapiens, we know for sure earlier hominids used fire. We know that just from archaeological evidence. But that cooking meat means that you don't have to have as large of jaws to chew the meat or the veggies or any other food. And that means that your skull is now freed up to maybe have a bigger brain. It's very hard to really narrow this down, but we do know there seems to be a correlation between cooking meat and then larger brain size. There could be a lot of reasons for that. We also see protection and literally changing the environment with something called fire stick farming. With fire stick farming, what we're having there is whenever you could go to a certain area, there might be animals hiding in the brush. You light it on fire. They run out, you kill them. Or you could take a whole area, field that's growing something wild that you don't like. You can burn that away, and it will encourage other crops you do like to grow there. So this isn't true farming yet. You're not really taking seeds and planting them, but this is going to radically change a lot of environments, especially Australia. Before people arrived to Australia, it's theorized that it was much more lush there, much less desert. People showed up and killed a lot of the animals and burnt down a lot of the grasslands. Another really interesting thing about humans compared to other species is their ability to live in really, really harsh environments. Pretty much any environment you can think of, humans are living in it. Desert, extreme cold, nice temperate island, jungle, etc. We're there. And we adapt to this environment through some evolutionary means. People living in northern latitudes historically tended to have lighter skin to absorb more vitamin D. There are some populations of Inuit in the far north parts of North America that seem to be better suited for cold than maybe somebody from Central America. But for the most part, people adapt through culture, meaning if a bear goes to someplace cold, it needs to get thicker fur. All right, something has to change evolutionarily. Well, humans will just kill that animal and take its fur and make clothing out of it. And this is something we don't see with any other surviving modern species. So what was the life of early humans like? Well, people lived in small tribes, and these tribes were kinship-based. Kinship is an interesting word in world history. Kinship means people you're related to, so extended family groups, cousins, etc. If you look down here, you can see that in order to have a population of certain numbers, that would mean you would need this much range in order to hunt and gather. And we're living in really small tribes at this time, 50, 100 people. So in order to not lead to interbreeding, you're going to have to exchange members in tribes. So tribes would get together. There might have been sites, like yearly sites, that people started to congregate to during a certain time of year, and people would exchange tribe members and exchange tools, etc. But we're not really looking at trade, something we're going to look at much later. There's something really cool in the brain. It's called Dunbar's number. It's this idea that really you can only maintain and keep social relationships with about 150, 180 people. After that, it really starts to fall apart. Now, you may be thinking, well, I know thousands of people. I go to a school with thousands of people. Yes. However, you're not really maintaining actual real social relationships with these people. And if you are, it's being aided by something artificial like your phone or social networking. And really, those relationships just aren't as strong as actual bonded relationships. Now, why do scientists think that people can only keep up to, at most 180 or so social relationships? Well, that's because there was never a need to. For most of human history, tribes will never get bigger than 150, 180 people. That'd be a very large tribe. The number one profession of early humans is hunting and gathering, hunter-gatherers. Gatherers are also called foragers. Most of the food probably came from gathering. It's different where if you go to a place that has a high fishing population or a place with a lot of large mammals species, then yeah, it might have been more hunting rather than gathering. But for the most part, we think that about 70% of gatherers, 70% of food came from gathering, and the rest came from hunting. You might be thinking, how do we know this? Well, we know this because we study modern hunter-gatherer tribes, and also you can go back and look at archaeological sites where you can find trash sites or dump sites, really. And in there you might see, there's a lot more evidence of organic plant matter than there is of animal matter. Now, gender roles were interesting here because there were clear gender roles. It seems that men, for the most part, not always, were the primary hunters, and women, for the most part, not always, were the primary gatherers. And but this isn't a patriarchal society. If you don't know what patriarchal means in this instance, it's where it's a male-dominated society. And this doesn't seem to be the case. Women probably provided the majority of food for people, and women had very important roles in raising children and finding food for people to eat. So women probably wielded a large amount of power. And while that gender imbalance is today, in the last 100 years, improving drastically for the good, and where men and women are becoming more equal, historically, once we get to farming, for the most part, women lose pretty much all their rights. And so we're going to see early society is really not geared to that. We also see socially, which I'll get to in a second, it's the same thing. You don't have social classes in these small. It's more egalitarian. There are no social classes. There is no idea of a wealth inequality, and this is for a really obvious reason. One, people don't have as much. These are hunter-gathering, nomadic, meaning they're moving around societies. Also, everyone knows everyone, right? These are really small tribes, probably just numbering 50, 60 people. Literally everyone knows everyone. And for many times, people are related to each other. Everyone will be related either through some sort of marriage or through actual blood. So again, this is kinship-based. And when you have smaller groups where people know each other, you don't, one, have enough wealth or enough people to have social classes. And two, you really aren't going to get inequality because everyone has a personal relationship with each other. And in many ways, people were healthier. We can look at the bones of hunter-gatherers and the bones of people living in agricultural villages, the first thing to spring up after we get farming. And we see that the same group of people, if they're hunter-gatherers, they're taller, their bones are healthier, they have more teeth, it looks like they have more musculature, they're stronger, and it's really obvious why this would be. They had a much better diet. They had what's called a broad-spectrum diet. They're eating a lot of different things, and this is where the idea of the paleo diet comes from. It's not accurate related to Paleolithic people, but the idea comes from that you're having non-domesticated or non-grain species of food, that you get a more of a broad-spectrum diet. Pretty much every nutritionalist will agree that a broad-spectrum diet is better so long as that broad spectrum is healthy food. And also, life was less stressful. People would think there was more free time. Hunting and gathering was relatively not that labor intensive compared to farming. And so we see that there's beautiful art that's created from these different groups. And yeah, life just seems a lot better. Why it is people might shift to this agricultural way of life. You should also know that, hunter-gatherers probably led a pretty violent life. There's a lot of death in a failed hunt. Also, old people that couldn't be cared for or children that couldn't be cared for were left to die or might be killed in their sleep. So this isn't some sort of like paradise society. Life was very tough. And in modern hunter-gatherer societies, you still have something like in some places, 1 out of every 2 of the children won't reach adulthood. So this is not a super fun place to grow up in. You can see their artwork is beautiful. It's large. But it's all going to change. So hopefully you got something from this. If you have any questions, remember just to email me or talk to me about it in class. Goodbye.